Welcome to the CBER Lunchbox Podcast. Hello, I'm Jess Williams, and thank you for tuning in to the CBER Lunchbox Podcast. Today, I am chatting to Matt Davis, who's a PhD student at the University of New South Wales. Hey, Matt. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me today.
So we will start off with some quickfire questions. Number one, favorite species?
African elephant.
Number two, favorite fieldwork location?
Oh, that's a really hard one. Let's say, can I just give a country?
Yes.
Does that work?
That works.
Namibia. Namibia is 100% my favorite.
I have never been there. I want to go.
Oh, it's pretty great. Obviously, it's my favorite location.
Okay, third question. Ideal next holiday destination when we can?
Yeah, so I guess this depends, seeing as we have been in a nice little global pandemic and I haven't seen my family for like 2 years. So I don't know if I consider going home to see my family a holiday because it's usually quite stressful. But I'll say back to California to visit my family. I feel like that's a good one.
That's a good one. We'll take that. Okay, and now a quick would you rather question. Animal themed, obviously. Would you rather have elephant's tusks or a monkey's tail?
Probably a monkey's tail. Oh, it depends. If we're getting really sciencey, it depends on the type of monkey. That's the problem.
Your
Are we
choice.
talking? Oh, well, if we're talking like New World monkeys, where the like spider monkeys are using their tails as an extra limb, definitely a monkey's tail.
We can go with that.
Yes, that's what we're doing.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so now let's talk about how you got into science. So how did you get into science? And did you always want to work in science?
It's I guess, yeah. I mean, I've always been interested in animals. I've always animals have kind of like been my thing since I was like really, really young. I think my first word was actually horse. I was like obsessed with animals as a kid. And my parents were really good. They used to take me like on bike rides to like local farms. We used to go to the zoo. So that kind of, I think, and spent a lot of time outside. So that kind of fostered my love of the outdoors and wildlife. But my dad is a scientist. My dad's a chemist.
Oh,
So
cool.
that kind of also, I think, made me gravitate towards science. And then I just like biology had always been the best subject in school. There was one class where it was like technology. It was like an elective class, and this technology class had like a bunch of different sections, and I always just went for the environmental science section within it. And you'd like sit on the computer. There was like a software that you used, and then all of this like little lab equipment, and you would go through different modules, and you would like create your own pond and sample different water samples, and also, and like I always just did that. I gravitated towards science from very young, and I advanced in science quite quickly in school. I mean, I was ahead than a lot of other kids. I was, going and sitting in on advanced science classes when I was like that were like a few years above me.
Wow.
Just because I was so interested in it. So that was, I think, kind of what made me want to work, or that's how I got into science, just because I've always had this general interest for it.
That's fantastic. I think that's really key, having an interest and just following it. That's brilliant. So how do you describe your PhD to friends and family?
Um, it depends on the friends and the I mean, it just, obviously I try to tailor my little description based on who I'm talking to. Um, Obviously, if it's somebody that has a bit more of a scientific background, I know I can use a little bit more of the scientific jargon.
If they don't
Um,
have a scientific background?
I usually say I study goats. And
Love
then
it.
I get the laugh from friends and family. And then they go, well, what about goats. And I used to say, goats, we're looking at their movements and how they behave in relation to environmental factors, mainly water. So that would be where there's water on the landscape, rainfall, and how that is impacting where they're going and how they're interacting with each other as well. In a desert landscape. So this is obviously an environment that experiences extremes, and one of those being extreme drought. And we've just come out of the drought, which is really nice. So that's kind of, I think I try to push the goats, water, desert. Those are kind of the three things I have to hit, and then all the in-betweens change depending on who I'm talking to.
Sounds like you got it nailed. You got the elevator pitch absolutely down to a T there. Brilliant.
I have to, because I mean, I meet a lot of people. I'm constantly talking to people, and everybody always, it's like it's like my least favorite question is like, what are you doing? Like, what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like, I'm out like having drinks. I don't want to talk about that.
Just give me another drink and talk about something else.
Yeah, let's talk about something else. So goats is the really easy, quick answer, and that's usually what draws people in, because I don't think I've ever met anybody else that studies goats. So
you are the first for me.
Yeah. And also people think goats, I think they automatically go to like, oh, farm, not like, oh, feral, invasive species, wild goat running around Australia. So that's kind of interesting with it as well.
Sounds really interesting. No, definitely. So you're originally from the States, but you did your undergraduate degree in Scotland, your master's at Imperial College in England, and your PhD is in Australia. And not to mention your time on many, many research projects across various countries. How have you found living abroad and moving from country to country over the course of your career so far?
I mean, my dad's job moved us around a lot as a kid, so I've kind of always been used to moving and used to living abroad, and I've always been relatively independent in the fact that I think I can pick up and go somewhere and make friends relatively easily and find a connection with, like, I tend to get along with most people, or I'm able to, pick something that we have in common and go with it when I meet someone. And I think it's just I'm somebody that I think craves diversity and craves adventure, and I like different, because I mean, as a queer person in science, and I know we're going to get to that later, but I've always saw myself as different and myself as diverse, and I want to, and that's how I want to experience life. Um, and yeah, I don't know. I jump at opportunities when somebody's like, "Hey, do you want to do this project in this exotic portion of this country that few people have ever heard of?" And I'm just like, "Yeah, definitely." Not so much anymore.
I mean, it's not really possible at the moment, but
Not
hopefully we'll
possible
get
at the
back there.
moment. Well, hopefully. I think also, like, as I've grown in my career, I'm glad I did a lot of the camping in the middle of some desert or rainforest for months, looking at some research projects. I'm glad I did that when I was younger, because I feel like I've reached a stage where I'm just like, I enjoy the comforts of like having a bed and not having to like light a fire to have a hot shower, and having an oven that works, and a refrigerator. Like there's certain comforts that I'm like, it is kind of nice to have these things.
Fair enough. Okay, so now we're getting on to what I've called Diva time. So, and in this next section, I'd like to discuss your experience as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and of course, introduce Diva Attenbra. So first, have you felt that the scientific community have been welcoming to you as a member of the LGBTQ plus community?
Yes and no. But no, not no. No as in like a neutral. I guess. I kind of didn't really include my sexuality in my like how I would openly introduce myself in science or how I would openly present myself in science. Um, and I think mainly during my undergrad, it was kind of something that everybody knew, nobody talked about, and during my master's, it was kind of like a slow like, yes, yeah, I am, but it never really became. It never was brought up in like an academic sense. It was a social thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then moving to Australia, I kind of just decided I didn't really see representation of queer people in science, because that was the other thing, is that during my undergrad and during my master's and even during school and everything, I never really had interactions with queer professors, queer lecturers, queer people, other queer students. There weren't even that many that I knew of, at least. And so it was it was just something that never really came to my brain. And it wasn't a negative thing. I never felt like I couldn't present myself a certain way in any situation that I have had been in previously. But I don't know, moving to Australia, kind of gave me that opportunity where I was like, oh, like I can be that representation that I didn't really see um, in my previous degrees or previous experiences. And obviously, this is you would know as a woman that this is a very at least the top sections are a very white, straight male dominated industry. So there are times when I guess in a more formal setting that I could feel a little bit uncomfortable, but I don't think I would ever feel unwelcome, or I don't think I've ever had experienced anything where I wouldn't have gotten a project, or I wouldn't have gotten, a collaboration, or I wouldn't have gotten a job or anything like that because of my sexuality or because of how I presented it. I mean, obviously there's also the difference, I guess, between um, my studies in science, academia versus fieldwork, because fieldwork is a
Yes.
very different story. Um, because most of the countries that I have worked in fieldwork wise, at least at the time I was doing fieldwork, it was criminal to essentially be homosexual. Um, so it was a very different environment, and there were very different factors that came to play. I don't think I ever felt unsafe, but there have been plenty times where I felt uneasy and uncomfortable in the field, but never in a university setting or a school setting. I haven't felt unwelcome. It's just the fact that I haven't felt like it was mentioned at all, um, or it didn't matter. So
So then I guess potentially two things that the scientific community could do better would be to, first of all, make sure all kinds of people are represented, like whether they're different backgrounds, different genders, different races, different sexualities. Make sure that voices are heard and represented for younger generations to be like, that's fine. Like, I see what I feel like represented in science, and that could be a
yeah,
good role model. And then I guess the second thing would be to be aware, when as a scientific community, when we are sending people out or offering the people a chance to go into the field, make sure that they feel comfortable and safe.
yeah, I think that I mean, one of the the basis for a lot of, I guess, what we term as homophobia isn't actually homophobia. It's more ignorance, and it's
Mm-hmm.
more lack of interaction or any sort of visual representation other of queer people, other than what the media gives you, the news gives you, all of this stuff. And so there's lots of groups at the minute that are working, and a lot of queer science groups in particular, and queer STEM groups that are working to be like, hey, like, queer people are everywhere. Like we're everything. We're normal people that do normal jobs like everybody else. And even just by putting a rainbow flag at my desk at my office, I had people in my first year come up to me and be like, oh, hey, like we're part of the queer community as well, but we're not out yet. But it's really nice to see that, you're like, there's somebody here that, is representing and that we could come talk to if we have a problem and all of these things. And that's, the reason why I wanted to be outwardly queer in academia, was so that there was somebody, because I didn't have that. And then the second point, I guess it's less about making people aware of the risks, because queer people, we know the risks. That's the thing. Like I fully knew going to certain countries that, this is a thing that I need to be aware of and I need to be careful. I think it's more, what lacks is that, at least UNSW, where I study, there is an ally training. And I think it should be for everyone. I think everyone, like at least graduate students and staff, should be required to take some sort of ally training.
So what is that exactly?
So it's usually like a half-day training or a day-long training where you go and you learn about the queer community, you learn about, what each letter stands for, you learn how to interact with the queer community in a respectful and mindful way. Certain, there's obviously there's many instances where somebody means well and somebody obviously doesn't mean to be malicious or say the wrong thing, but mistakes happen and things pop out and, stuff happens, and you just kind of have to be aware, and sometimes how you speak and how you interact with people, just because you think it means something doesn't mean that's what other people think it means. And something that like was brought up to me was the fact that, like, when we're doing risk assessments for field work, like I put as a risk on my fieldwork that, oh, I'm a queer person. There is a risk of, I'm working in rural Australia, I'm working in, or any rural country that I might be working in. There's a risk that like I could, in a relatively conservative area, be harmed in some way or verbally abused, or, something could happen. And that's something that a lot of, the straight colleagues that I have, it's not something that would ever even cross their mind. I think it's less so for women, because obviously women or female presenting people would also deal with, possible harm or possible harassment. But in many cases, like, it's something that, oh, we never even would have thought of that. And I feel like some sort of ally training, just to be aware that, oh, like there are other things that people do have to worry about when they do the same. Like, we all have different experiences, and obviously I'm not saying that people in the straight community or and anyone doesn't have a risk of some sort for something. It's just I guess making sure everyone's aware, and it's less about making queer people aware of the risk, but more, I guess, the other people aware of the risks that straight people may have to deal with. And then how do we adjust the program, or how do we adjust the work, or how do we do this to make it more safe for you and not put it on that person to be like, because if it was put on me, honestly, like my past fieldwork experiences, it was, what do I have to do? Oh, act straight, like cisgendered, straight, masculine. And that shouldn't be on me. It should be on, whoever the program is, or the whoever's running the field work, to be like, oh, we need to put these certain things in place to make sure that researchers can feel safe and authentic in themselves. Because honestly, in the end, that's what makes better science. Like, if you're able to be yourself, and if you're able to feel comfortable and safe, and it's one less thing to worry about. And as you would know, in a PhD, there's a lot to worry about.
Yep. We'll get to that one later as well. Okay,
Yeah.
so now introduce us to Diva Attenbra and your plans for Diva.
So Diva Attenbra was kind of this thing, this creature that I had in my head for a good 2 years, I think, before I actually pulled the plug and put some makeup on my face. But or pulled the trigger, not pulled the plug, I guess would be the right phrase. But she is this, I kind of refer to her as the Nigel Thornberry of drag, because she's equal parts enthusiastic about nature and wildlife, and balanced out perfectly with being stupid and funny and dumb and just a good time. And I think she was born during COVID, during isolation, sitting at home, um, being like, what do I do with my time? Oh, I have makeup. Oh, I have nothing else to do. There's no one to see. I'm stuck at home. Might as well do this. Um, but also, I dealt with, and I'm sure it'll be brought up later. I've gone through a lot of struggles in my PhD, and I was kind of falling out of love with science, and I didn't want that. And I was like, what can I do to make me enjoy this again? And Diva was my way of being able to bring together my queer side and my science and my love for science, and put it into this one form. Um,
One gorgeous form. She's amazing.
Gorgeous. Sometimes she's gorgeous. Sometimes she's crawling out of dumpsters, but we'll see. But yeah, I mean, the response, and I kind of just decided, yeah, I'm gonna do drag. So I started posting stuff and doing virtual shows, and then I've been doing live shows here in Sydney, and um, the response has been really, really incredible. I don't know what's in the books for her. There's a lot of exciting things. She's slowly taking over my life. Well, at least my closet, at least my clothes rack is just full of crap now. But um, she's she's pretty special, and people are really responding really well to it. And I'm hoping, obviously, I guess the question that always gets raised to me is, are you ever going to go on Drag Race, RuPaul's Drag Race, or are you going to do this? And obviously, those would be incredible things. I don't know if I'm the right fit for the television show. That's, I guess, up to them and less to me, because I'm not going to change who I am for TV. Um, I do at some point, once I get the skills, because I am technologically illiterate. So once I get the skills in order to be able to film and edit and do a lot of things, I'd love to do a kind of naturey, David Attenborough-esque, wildlife YouTube-y kind of show where I just talk about animals in drag, but make it funny. Because that's the other thing, is I feel like Diva was kind of born out of this science communication hole, where I feel like there's a lack sometimes that scientists want to communicate their science, but a lot of audiences don't understand it, because and that's all stemmed from being thrust into a PhD project, from a project that I had been continuing from my master's, where I was knowledgeable and I knew what I was doing, to being thrust into a PhD, where a project where I had never worked in Australia before. I'd never worked with these species. I had no idea what I was doing. I was reading all these papers and I wouldn't understand a single thing. And it kind of stemmed, yeah, I guess, from this idea of, how do I explain scientists to the 15-year-old girl who's sitting there with her iced coffee, wearing her Uggs, and she's doesn't really want to pay attention. And I'm like, well, if you paint yourself like a clown and you throw in a few explicit jokes in with some actual facts, people will actually really respond to that. And I guess what's coming up for Diva, I've been asked to sign up for a possible comedy stand-up night.
That's exciting.
A science-themed stand-up night. here in Sydney. So we'll see what happens with that. I am terrified,
I have faith. I have faith in you.
but we'll see what happens. Yeah, it's a big unknown at the minute. Obviously, my PhD is the number one in my life at the moment, and Diva is something. It's been my way to be creative and my creative outlet, where I still feel like I'm doing something related, which is nice.
And that sounds really exciting. Just see where it goes. And I wish you the absolute
Exactly.
best of luck. Okay.
Thank
so
you.
You're mentioning your PhD there.
Yeah.
And how it hasn't gone smoothly.
Yeah.
So what hurdles have you had to overcome? And if you could go back to that time or back to the start of your PhD, what piece of advice would you give yourself to help you overcome, or maybe not even have to come across those hurdles?
There's been kind of three big hurdles. The first being I was supposed to be continuing my master's research, which was in Botswana on African mammals and their water usage and how water influences their behavior. Very similar to the project I'm doing now, just obviously in Africa with much larger animals and much more dangerous animals. And
Goats can be quite dangerous too.
they actually can be pretty dangerous, but and kangaroos hitting them with cars, but
Oh gosh.
it's dangerous. No, it's terrifying. You can't drive at night here sometimes, or
Wow.
in the field. Sydney's fine, but yeah, no, it's I had been working on that project my master's, and then about a year into my PhD, there were issues with our research permits. The Botswana government wasn't working very well with the organization that I was working with in Botswana. And there were a lot of little bits and pieces. And unfortunately, I got caught up in that and I wasn't able to obtain a research permit. So that was my first year of my PhD kind of thrown out the window. And then my supervisor said, hey, let's do something in Australia. So the second hurdle came when he said, let's do something on kangaroos. So we were going to do kangaroo movement around water availability, and we were in the midst of a very long, very intense drought in the Australian desert. And it got to the point where we went to go put some tracking GPS collars on some kangaroos, and we couldn't find any. They had all died.
Oh gosh.
From the drought. So finally we were like, what are we going to do? And then plan C was, well, what's the one animal that has survived this drought? Goats. So let's work on goats. They are honestly the cockroaches of the mammal world. Like when the nuclear holocaust takes us all out, the only thing left on this planet is going to be cockroaches and goats.
And rats.
No,
Rats.
I don't even think rats.
No.
I don't even think, no, goats are just insane. Like it's just, they could live through anything, and because they eat anything, they just drink whatever. They're just like, yeah, they're smart animals, surprisingly. So yeah, so those are some of the hurdles. And I guess if I could go back in time, I don't know if I would change anything, to be honest. I mean, obviously this isn't the PhD I signed up for, and I found it very difficult at times. Mainly because obviously this is something extremely new to me, at least the species and behaviors and Australian wildlife is very new to me, and I didn't think that my PhD was going to be easy, but I thought, going in, continuing my master's, I had already worked in Botswana in the field, so I was comfortable in the field there. I already knew what I was kind of just doing the same project expanded. So I knew the methods I was doing. I knew what, the stats I needed to do. I knew, well, stats I needed to do to an extent. I'm not good at stats. But it was very, I thought logistically, I knew the work would be hard and the work would be difficult, the academic side, but logistically planning field work, going to the field, doing that stuff would be easy. And that didn't happen. And so I think the only thing that I would tell myself really differently coming into my PhD was you just got to remember that it doesn't matter if you're in the middle of the African wilderness or if you're in the middle of Sydney, Australia, or London, or somewhere in the States. Like, stuff changes with a snap of the fingers, and you just need to kind of be like, look, that's unfortunately life. That's what happens. And you just got to move on to the next thing. And that's kind of what I've done. And my supervisor, my academic panel, they've all have been like, we don't understand how you functioned through all of this, because most people would just crumble. And I just say, ignorance is bliss. I'm just like, it's all gonna, I think that's the other thing you have to remember is that, there's so many more important things in life. And
keeping stuff in perspective.
Keeping it in perspective. And I think that that's the other thing is that, I had the option. My supervisor was like, you could come back, because I was waiting on my Botswana permits back in the US. And he said, you can come back to Australia, do a project, or we can call it. And he's like, nobody would blame you either way. Like, if you wanted to leave this PhD. And I said, I had the option and I stayed, and I don't think I'd change that because I feel like I already had started building a life in Sydney, and I've already started there, because there's the other aspect that you don't think about with a PhD is like, oh, you still have this human life outside of the PhD.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, I've already made all these friends and I've built the support system, and I move around so much. Like, I had moved around a lot in my life, and I was like, I was finally feeling like I was in a place that I could see myself staying a bit longer. And it would have been a shame if I didn't give myself the chance to experience that. So I'm glad I continued on. And then the other big hurdle obviously was COVID.
Yes.
That was obviously, and that was to no fault of anybody. It was maybe governments that screwed us over a little bit. In certain countries, the Australian government surprisingly did a really good job, surprisingly being the key word. But no, obviously, but that impacted everyone. That's not really, I guess, it's not really a hurdle.
Definitely a legit hurdle.
It's a legit hurdle, but I don't know if it's not like a PhD for Matt exclusive hurdle. It's something
I
that
still think you can say it's a hurdle for your PhD. Having to stop all field work, trying to do a PhD in a global pandemic, that counts. You can use that.
Was the thing. Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. I mean, I was literally in the field, and we got the call from the university, and they said, you have to come back to Sydney because the university's shutting down. So wow. That was my first actual field trip. I was luckily able to get some of my motion sensor cameras out, and I was starting to collect some data while we were called back to Sydney. So I was like, okay, these will be fine for a few months. At least I'm getting something, and I'm not just still a year and a half into my PhD not having any data or anything to work with. Everybody has, I think, different experiences with COVID. I think for my PhD, definite hurdle, definite struggle. But for life in general, I mean, it kind of gave me a chance that I never really had to sit with myself and think about who I was and what I actually wanted to do and where I saw myself. And obviously, like I said, Diva was born out of COVID. And so obviously it's terrible that it happened, and it's unfortunate that it happened, but also there were goods and bads for me personally. And like I said, even earlier, I haven't seen my family in 2 years, negative. There's goods and bads that came from it from me. And then I also, during COVID, came out as non-binary. So that was, I guess, like I said, there was a lot of time just sitting, thinking about who I was and how I saw myself in this world and in my community, and what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go and who I wanted to be. And so, yeah. So that's why I don't really consider it a hurdle as much, because obviously it was a struggle to get through, and obviously it impacted my PhD. But I don't know if it was as much of a hurdle as just a little speed bump.
With some good things coming out of it, which is
with a few
fantastic.
Good things coming out of it.
Yeah.
which is lucky because I know obviously a lot of people had a really difficult time and it impacted a lot of people very negatively. And I was very fortunate that, as well as being an American, being fortunate that I was living abroad in a country that handled the crisis pretty quickly and pretty strictly, and we've been living relatively normally for a while, which has been really amazing. And obviously I have tons of friends in the US and I have loads of friends in the UK, and I've seen what you've all had to go through, and it's unfortunate because all I want to do is have like you guys come dance with us.
Well, if I can, please can I come?
Yeah.
Please. When
Yeah.
can I come now?
I don't know, you have to quarantine in a hotel for 2 weeks though.
Oh
That's the
gosh.
unfortunate bit. In a one room for 2 weeks.
I mean, my small flat is probably not much bigger than the hotel room would be, but
I mean, yeah,
at least I have 2 cats here to keep me company.
that's true.
I wouldn't have any pets out there. So, pros and cons. Okay.
Pros and cons.
Now to field work.
Yep.
Have you got a funniest experience in the field?
I don't really know. There's just so many. I think like the thing with fieldwork is a lot of it has to do with the people you're with. And a lot of it, I mean, even my most recent field trip, which was only like, I think like I got back maybe a month ago. And it was just me, and by the end of it, it was me and one girl. And we didn't even talk to each other. We did everything in song. Like we were like singing everything to each other. And I think like when you have some like another person or another group of people that are on that same level of insane as you are, and you're all out in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing to do and you just go a little crazy, and it's moments like that that are honestly like the most fun in my, like the research is obviously great and the actual work itself is fun, but and enjoyable if you love it, but it's honestly every single field experience I've ever been on, it's the people that make it fun and funny. And
How about a scary experience? Have you got one scariest moment?
The scariest moment, I mean, obviously working in Africa, there were a lot of close calls with a lot of pretty dangerous animals. Um, I think the scariest, it was actually, I was bitten by a violin spider,
Oh gosh.
and in Namibia. And I was, luckily the person I worked for, the couple that I was working for, the husband was a doctor, so he was able to keep an eye on it for me. But I mean, it's little, it wouldn't have killed me. I don't think it would have killed me or anything, but it's obviously being in a remote country, or a remote place in a foreign country, um, it's kind of terrifying when that stuff happens to you, and you're just, especially being so remote, and you're like, it's scary, like not having the comforts of home, and
Yeah.
being, even in that moment, you could be like great friends with everybody that's in the field with you, but you feel really alone because you're like, well, I'm close with all these people, I like all these people, but maybe I've only known them for like a couple of weeks. And I'm like, I just like want my parents, or I want my best friends that I know really well. And
Yeah.
so that's, I mean, there's obviously tons of actual like really, really scary things that have happened as well, charged by elephants and all sorts of animals. But sometimes it's just those little things that really get to you.
You realize that you're so far away from home in those
Yeah.
moments. And now, one object that you should make sure you never forget on field trips. Do you have something that you always take, or that you advise anyone else going into the field they must take?
It's hard because obviously it depends on where you're going in the field. I mean, obviously something to do, like always bring a hard drive that has movies on it or whatever. But obviously it depends on where you're going. And I don't know if that's like essential. I think the one object that you should always make sure you never forget on field trips is duct tape. Not even field work. I have it for drag. I have it for like the times I've had to like duct tape shoes together, or like equipment falls apart and you have to duct tape it. Like duct tape is just if you can even get that like Gorilla Tape, that really, really like strong stuff,
Yeah, I know the
anything like
one.
that, that is, I think, a fieldwork essential.
Or a
If you're
life
not
essential.
exactly, I definitely say that.
Good. I like that. I actually do have some in our van downstairs. We have Gorilla Tape, and it's holding too many things
Yeah,
together.
it's magic. You can use it for literally anything.
Okay, and now the last question I'm going to go for. What are your top 3 tips for surviving a PhD?
So my top 3 tips would be, um, let's say, expect the unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
Just and be aware that, you know, things change. Drop of a pin or drop of a hat, whatever the saying is. um, just be aware that stuff changes and that it's okay to be stressed about it and it's okay to be frustrated with it, but just remember that it's not the end of the world. And there are people that are, I guess that's number 2. There are people there to help you. I always forget that. My academic panel, my supervisor, people have to remind me sometimes. They're like, we're here to help you get your PhD. And we are here, like, if you have a problem, it doesn't even need to be PhD related. If you have, like, if you're struggling mentally, or you're going through something outside or this or that, like, we're here to help you. Like, we're people, like, we and obviously it depends, I know a lot of people maybe don't have the best relationships with their supervisors or with people. I've been very fortunate that my supervisor has been great, my academic panel has been great. But yeah, as somebody that's gone through quite a bit of upheaval in my PhD, it's nice to know that I have this support system ready to help me out. And number 3, I would say work-life balance has saved me, because I look at a lot of PhD students that I work with sometimes, and they're so into their PhD and it's amazing and they love it, and they spend all their time on it, and I'm not a person that can do that. What's helped me the best is I treat my PhD like a 9 to 5 job. And obviously, if there's something urgent that needs to be done, or obviously I need to do something, and obviously field work is different as well, like, I go off that schedule. But I try and treat it like, once I get to the office, or once I get to my desk at home or my home office, um, like, I start, and then once it hits whatever time I want to finish for the day or whatever time I leave the office, I leave, and it leaves my brain, and I go. Obviously, COVID has been difficult, and obviously, other countries have different restrictions and things like that. And I've been fortunate that in Australia, I'm able to, go out with friends, have a drink, go to a friend's house, have dinner, cook dinner for friends. Like, having that work-life balance is really important. And just remember that, you know, a PhD, it is like a job, and in the grand scheme of things in the world, like, your job doesn't mean everything. There's so many more like, don't forget to, like, live your life. Don't forget that there's, like, other things. Go to a drag show, tip your queens.
I did go to one last Wednesday, actually.
I'm glad.
I got way too excited and drank way too much. It was brilliant.
And that's what we like to see.
It was
That's what
fantastic.
we want. Yeah, and I can tell you, that's what drag has done for me. It's given me that outside of my PhD life to live, and then I'm more motivated to go into the office. I'm more motivated. I'm more focused when I'm actually working and I'm doing these things, because I let my brain rest and I let my body rest. And it takes a lot of energy sometimes to just sit and look at a screen and read some papers. And, like, I think I can read 2 papers in a day, and then my brain's just like, I'm done. And that's the thing. A PhD is hard, but also life is hard. So make sure that you pay just as much attention to life as you do your PhD.
I think that is a fantastic place to close. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been brilliant to chat to you.
Thank you so much for having me.